This is Twit.
Well, folks, it's now time for us to bring in a special guest to take us through VMworld 2019. And he is the father of This Week in Enterprise Tech and our resident expert at finding massage stations at conferences, especially VMworld, our very own Father Robert Ballecer. Padre Este, welcome back, Padre.
Lou, thank you. It's so good to be back. It's like coming back into an old apartment and just knowing where everything is.
Absolutely.
By the way,
I get what you mean.
that massage station at VMworld, that was no joke. That was awesome, especially since every other conference I've gone to, the massage stations are always taken up, and I don't think most people knew about this. So I may have gotten a few too extra. Sorry about that, VMworld.
Got it. I get it though. You walking around, you're in these conferences. Sometimes they could be a little boring, and you also get a little tense walking around. So you need a little bit of a massage to keep things flowing. But I guess that there's lots of excitement there at VMworld. Maybe you can take us through some of the common themes that you've seen there, that you saw there.
Absolutely. So, I mean, if you've listened to, watched, read any of the coverage from VMworld 2019, you know that the big thing was Kubernetes. It was Kubernetes, Kubernetes, Kubernetes. If every keynote, every major address, at some way, shape, or form, had that integrated into the presentation. And so that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the easy target. If someone were to ask you what VMworld 2019 was all about, you could just say, oh, well, they're doing K8. I don't think so, though. I think there is an overarching trend that actually goes beyond just Kubernetes, and that is the fact that at VMworld 2019, you're starting to see the emergence of this idea that instead of asking on-prem, hybrid, private cloud, instead of asking, am I using a VM? Am I using a container? Instead of asking, am I going to be going with a VDI solution, or am I going with something more like remote desktops that are a bit more secure, VMworld 2019 said, yes, all of those things. If you look at the various companies that are closely tied to VMware, and I'm talking about, of course, Dell, which owns 82% of VMware, and Pivotal, and now Carbon Black, and Microsoft with their partnership, and of course Dell, you can see that they're trying to recreate themselves as the nuts to bolts vendor. They can literally take you from the development of your applications to the deployment of your servers to your users, all within the same platform. And I think that's, for me, that's the exciting overarching trend.
Okay, Padre. I've got a question, though. You mentioned VDI. I was under the impression that VDI was kind of a zombie walking around and that it had its heyday and never came up. Are you hearing differently from VMworld?
Absolutely. Now, like you, I remember VDI hit the stage, and it was a big splash. Everyone was talking about it. They were saying, oh, this is how the future of the enterprise is going to look. And then it kind of disappeared because it was expensive, it was slow, and infrastructure just really wasn't there to support it. Well, Dell had a huge push into VDI, and they were pushing their VX Block solutions, which basically allows you to control every aspect of your user's desktop, no matter where they are, in the building, operating in the cloud, or operating way off the cloud. So they weren't pushing it. It wasn't like the last time we heard about VDI when they were saying, this is the next best thing, this is the next best thing. They're now selling VDI as, well, if you already buy into this virtual infrastructure, if you already do hybrid cloud, if you already do both VMs and containers, then VDI is just something you get. And I think that is it's a far better solution. That's a more winning solution, because it tells the users, we're not trying to sell you something, we're trying to make you use something you already have. That's good.
Now, there's been a lot of announcements, obviously, at VMware. Tons of announcements, actually. Lots of acquisitions, lots of announcements. What was the major theme there? I mean, it seems like they're focusing on Kubernetes quite a bit. And with things like, Tanzu, which actually, interesting enough, is Swahili for branches, is kind of bridging the edge-to-edge solution for Kubernetes types involvement. Is that what you were seeing there? Is like mostly focusing on that?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so Project Tanzu, that was the big one. That was the big announcement. That's the one that got all the buzz going. That's why everyone thinks that the entire show was about Kubernetes. Now, what Project Tanzu is, and remember, this is not available now. There is Tanzu that you can get and you can play with, but most of the features that people want are going to be available at a future date. It allows you to create a native Kubernetes platform, a native container platform within VMware vSphere. So in other words, you no longer have to choose between running VMs or running containers or doing some bastardized mix of the two. You can have one hypervisor that does both equally well. That's what got people excited, because if they don't have to choose between running a container system or running a virtual machine system or running some sort of bastardization where you have a container system running inside of a VM, you have way more options. It means you don't have to redevelop your applications and your services every time you want to switch platforms. Now, along with Project Pacific, which was the main chunk of Tanzu, you also had Mission Control. Now, Mission Control was the part of Tanzu that gave you the single pane of glass to monitor, to manage all Kubernetes instances. And that's all. I mean all. That means on private cloud, on public cloud, the homebrew Kubernetes containers and clusters, you can now see from a single pane of glass. That, for me, was more exciting than anything else, because if you give me a single point to interface with everything that I'm running, it makes my job a lot easier. You've also got, I mean, you must have heard about the acquisitions, right? I mean, the acquisitions were the ones that really kind of got people wondering what was going on there. They made a $2.7 billion acquisition of Pivotal, or they're going to close it. They made a $2.1 billion acquisition of Carbon Black, and they also got Bitnami, and they didn't say how much that was going to cost. And a lot of people were looking at those acquisitions and saying, we're not exactly sure what you get. I mean, that's a lot of money considering the fact that VMware made $2.4 billion last quarter. So this is $5+ billion in acquisitions in a single day. Why did you do this? They basically had access to Pivotal. Pivotal is actually spun off from EMC in 2015, and they're acquiring it for the same IPO price, $15 a share, that Pivotal originally went for. So what do they want it for? Pivotal doesn't actually give you anything that VMware doesn't already do. Now, you have to also remember that you can think of Pivotal as sort of a secure app incubator. It gives developers a secure space to spin up these new services, these new projects, and then auto-deploy to the cloud. Well, that's great, and it sounds good, and it does work. It's a decent solution, but you've also got solutions that do the same thing from Microsoft, from AWS. Even IBM has a public-private hybrid cloud deployment solution. So why did VMware do that? Also with Carbon Black. Carbon Black is all about security. There's already security baked into VMware's products, so why did they spend $2.1 billion to get something that they already have? And I think the trend among the attendees was to start looking not at, well, that's a product they already have, but rather that's a product that no longer competes with VMware, which is sort of like the way that the Yankees buy players. They don't necessarily need the players, but they want to take those players off the field for other teams. I think VMware is doing the same thing here. Now, it's either going to work and everyone's going to be amazed at the genius. I mean, this is sort of like the reinvention of Microsoft when Satya Nadella took over, or it's going to be a ridiculously bad acquisition and they're going to have to divest them like HP did a few years back. But you know, that's more or less an overview.
Chris, you had a question too, right?
I did indeed. And Padre, you were talking about, you know, all of these bits and pieces. You were talking about the idea of being able to run containers on top of virtual machines. When you were talking to people and listening to people at VMworld, is it getting to a point of complexity where the real battle is going to be over the orchestration and automation systems rather than all of the specific virtual machine and container creation and hosting frameworks? I mean, you're starting to get a lot of moving pieces, and we're already seeing some significant security issues from people misconfiguring the darn things.
Yes, yeah, and actually, I think that's what's behind the Bitnami acquisition. So Bitnami provided a write once, deploy to many cloud solution. So the idea is you can take pre-built, pre-tested Kubernetes clusters, and then you can modify them slightly and then deploy them automatically. And like you said, that takes a lot of the guesswork away. It's no longer, well, do I go AWS? Do I go Azure? Do I go Google? Am I going to try IBM? Maybe I want to go with a Dell on-prem solution. they're trying to take that away. They don't want that to be a question anymore. They want that to be something that you decide way down the line when you actually start looking at price and how quickly you can scale up solutions. What VMware wants you to do is to say, just stay with us and you can push it everywhere. We are reversing the lock-in. We are reversing this idea that you're going to buy an incredibly expensive infrastructure that you're going to be stuck with for the next 10 years. Now, if they do that, then the question becomes mute as to why you would use VMware. It's, of course you would use VMware because it does everything. It works everywhere. It works with every service. It works with all your VMs. It works with all your containers. And because Dell EMC and VMware are all the same company, it also means those same services that you've deployed out into your public, your private cloud, your hybrid cloud, wherever it might be, can also be accessed by all of your employees everywhere, no matter where they are, no matter what platform they're using, no matter what level of security they need. And because of my acquisitions of something like Carbon Black, it means I can protect my endpoints as well as I can protect my core. That is a compelling story. And more importantly, that is a compelling story that lets most C-level executives ignore all the minutia that has become so important over the last decade.
Now, interesting enough, they didn't cover too much about networking, but the interesting enough is that VMware has kind of been the king of NSX for a while. In fact, there's some stats they showed is they have 13,000 plus customers, 8 out of 10 top telcos, 88% of the F100 fund companies, and they're number one in SD-WAN. Now, the question is, did they show you at all what's next for them here in that space?
Kind of. I think because they're now, it's really, again, you really do have the three big companies. You have EMC, you have Dell, you have VMware. They don't see the need to compete with each other. So if you wanted to find out what they were doing in net space, you went over to the Dell booth. And that's all they were about. If you wanted to find out what they were doing with services and say their flash arrays, you went over to the EMC side. And otherwise, you just talked to the VMware partners. So they haven't abandoned it. They just realized that they don't have to duplicate all the solutions that all their other major partners already have. That's not to say that they don't want the entire pie. It's just to say that they're okay with sharing it with the companies that are basically one entity.